whatever works. But no, I appreciate your doing this. Yeah, I mean, so I've got a couple of questions here, but anything that I'm missing, feel free to fill in. But basically, I'm curious to hear more about you and your experience during the war, and how you think it changed the world and how you think it changed you, basically. But I'll start off with just a general question before talking about that. Introduce yourself and where you're from, where you grew up, anything else about your life before the war.
I'm Ralph Goldsticker. I grew up in U City, graduated U City High School in August of 1938. We moved into the city for 10 years from 1938 to 1948 when I got married, and we lived in Clayton for 55 years and been living in Creve Coeur the last 20.
And tell me a little bit about, in the years leading into the war, what you remember about the world and what was happening in the United States and the circumstances that led to the start of the war.
Well, growing up, of course, was during the Depression, and we knew the war going on. It was September 1st, 1939, when the war started. I was in college at the time. I went to Orson U for 6 months and then went to Harris Teachers College for a year and a half. We couldn't afford the $125 a semester so we were living in the city at the time, and Harris Teacher College was free to city residents. And when Pearl Harbor broke out, I was at Ben Schuline's house playing a conclave for a Pi Tau Pi fraternity that Sunday morning. But leading up to it, we just read the papers and that was it. It didn't really affect me. I was working downtown at Rice Sticks, making 50 cents an hour as a clerk. I had the 2 years of college and I wasn't much of a student, so my father knew a friend who got me a job at Rice Sticks. So I was working there when Pearl Harbor broke out. I knew I was going to get drafted, so I applied to the Army Aviation Cadet Corps to be a cadet. I wanted to be an officer, and there was a brochure that said in 6 months you could be a pilot, a bombardier, and navigator. And my uncle was an officer, he's a West Point graduate, so I wanted to be an officer like he was. So I applied to the Aviation Cadet Corps and was accepted and took the tests and enlisted July 6, 1942 in the Army Air Corps.
Makes sense. And so you talked about Pearl Harbor and where you were. Tell me a little bit about your thinking then and how the country changed and how your mindset changed before you enlisted.
Well, they had a draft before then. The draft was for a year, and some of my friends went in and get drafted, get the year over and get out. Well, they got in, and before the year was out, Pearl Harbor came in, so they're in for the duration. So, I don't know, the whole country was affected, of course. At that time, we weren't prepared. But
yeah.
I don't know how we outproduced the Germans. That's an amazing thing, the number of planes, tanks, landing craft, whatever needed that we did with Rosie Riveter and all her friends.
Yeah.
Producing. No, they had, I don't know, a few hundred aircraft, I guess, and maybe 1,000, I don't know. And at the end of the war, I think they built 300,000 aircraft. I know they built over 12,000 B-17s and 12,000 B-24s, our big heavy bombers at that time, and I don't know how many B-29s, which are used in Japan.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to do the math. You were about 21 when you enlisted in 42?
20.
You were 20?
Yeah.
You enlisted in the Army Air Corps, so tell me a little bit about your training and where you went before you were deployed.
Well, after I enlisted, I went to Jefferson Barracks for about 2 months. And they were waiting for a classification center in Nashville to open up where I was sent to tested all the people in aviation get that corps to see if they're qualified to be a bombardier, a navigator, or a pilot. And they tested inside and outside, physically, mentally, psychologically to see. And I passed all three and said I wanted to be a pilot. So I went to pre-flight at Maxwell Field. Fortunately, Maxwell Field was an old established air base. There were 60 people in barracks. We had suites of 6, so it was much better living. And after 6 weeks of pre-flight, I was going to Dar Aerotech at Albany, Georgia for pilot training and flying in a PT-17. That's a biplane,
Yeah.
open cockpit biplane. So I passed my 20 hours. And after 10 hours, I soloed for the first time. And I remember going straight down the runway and beautiful landing. And I thought the wind was coming from the left, so I kicked the left rudder and spun around and cracked the wing. I can still see my instructor at the end of the runway throwing his parachute down, and how could a student do that? But he did the same thing next day, so it was all right. I only cracked 3 wings in the time. I had 46 hours of pilot school, got washed out. My 40-hour check, you're supposed to go upwind when they cut the engine. I went downwind, so that didn't help. So I got washed out and went back to Nashville and said I want to be a bombardier. And I wanted to be a pilot because I guess I'd seen too many Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart movies. They're all the heroes, so that's what I wanted to be.
Had you ever been on a plane before?
Never been in a plane till New Year's Eve in 1942. First time I was in a plane, PT-17 biplane.
Scary?
No, it was fun. It really was. And I still remember soloing. I mean, playing around the sky all by myself. It was great. Last fall, went for another ride at PT-17 out at Smart Field, and it was great. So, no, I enjoyed it. But as a bombardier, you have 2 50-caliber guns in the nose. So I had 6 weeks. Went back to pre-flight for another 6 weeks at Ellington Field. Then I went to Laredo for 6 weeks of gunnery school. And then I had 12 weeks of bombardier school and 6 weeks of navigation school. So I was commissioned on December 4th, 1943. The day before, unfortunately, 2 airplanes collided and 3 of my classmates were killed. And if you know anything about the Army, everything is alphabetical. And this was Dempsey, ID, and French. And Goldsticker was next. We hadn't been together for 6 or 7 months. So I was not good, but I was commissioned. Then from there, I went to MacDill Field, where they set up bomber crews, B-17 crews of 10-man crews, and pilot and co-pilot, bombardier, navigator. We had radio man, top engineer, and 2 waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, and a tail gunner.
Can you talk about what it was like to lose 3 of the men who you had trained with for, it sounds like, at least a couple of months?
About 6, 7 months.
Yeah.
I was with them at pre-flight and gunnery school, and then the 12 weeks down at Childress, Texas for navigation bombardier. Of my 6 classmates at Maxwell Field, 4 of them were killed during the war. 3 were pilots, 1 was a navigator, and 2 of them I have letters I sent that came back. 1 deceased, 1 missing in action, but 4 of them were killed. But I read someplace there 14,000 people or soldiers were killed in training in the United States during the war.
Yeah.
Not the Air Force, but I guess all its branches. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I would presume it's a thing you expect to happen, but it can't make it a lot easier when it does.
No, I played cards with Yale was killed in Texas in an airplane accident. So I knew a couple others also. I knew some of my friends were killed in the war. They were brothers were. I was in the Boy Scouts with them.
Yeah.
But after went to MacDill Field, we flew around Florida for about 4 months, perfecting our bombing skills and piloting skills and navigation skills. And then we were sent to Savannah, Georgia to pick up a brand new B-17 to take it to Europe. So in May of 1944, we left Savannah and flew to Fort Dix, New Jersey for the night. And our co-pilot was in Far Rockaway, New York. And he called his father, said we'd be over in the morning. We were right down the middle of Main Street, about 100 feet above the rooftops. Well, they couldn't do anything to us. We're going overseas anyway, so nothing happened. I went from there to Labrador and to Iceland, and from Iceland to Ireland, England, Scotland. And we're assigned to the 452nd Bomb Group in England. They lost 14 out of 24 planes the 12th of May over Brooks, Czechoslovakia. So who went in his replacement in the 8th Air Force.
Did you know, at what point did you know you were going to Europe as opposed to into the Pacific, or did you always know that you were going to Europe?
I think I always knew. I had everything was then going out. It seemed like the Navy and the Army and the Marines were more so than the Pacific. And then, of course, they created the 20th Air Force with B-29s flying over Japan.
Yeah. So tell me, so you were over there in May of 44, you said, and tell me a little bit about training for your first, was D-Day your first combat mission?
Oh, no. We trained for about 2 weeks. I think we got there the 14th of May, and we flew around England getting acclimated for about 2 weeks. And then our first mission was the 27th of May into St. Valery, France. The group had gone off earlier that day into Germany, and they sent a flight of 6 of us. I had a gun emplacement on the coast of France, so we were over the coast 10 minutes maybe. It was nothing, no flag, no nothing. I thought, well, this isn't so bad. And then 2 days later, we went to Leipzig, about as far as you get to Germany, and we lost 3 planes out of 18 that day. And then we flew, that was a second mission, and third mission went to Bremen, and then we got up in 2 more missions up and down the coast before the invasion, and then hit bridges at Paris right before the invasion. I think on 4th of May. And then we're called into a briefing on the night of 10 o'clock on May 4th for the invasion. Well, it was called off. We were sent back, and then they called back on the 5th about 10 o'clock and said the invasion was on. And we took off at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was so many planes in the sky. We had to fly to Scotland before we could turn around and come back and hit the beaches. And I bombed between Sword Beach and City Con at 6:58 a.m. and got back about, I guess, 9:30, and they refueled the plane, and we had lunch or breakfast, whatever we had, took off again about 3 o'clock and bombed Argentine, which is about 30 miles south of the beaches, to keep the Germans from bringing reinforcements in. So it was another 7-hour flight on air, 14.5 hours D-Day. That's my 7th and 8th missions.
Were you aware when you went out for D-Day how historically significant it would be? Were you aware that was sort of a different type of mission?
I think so. The reason I say that, I have a cotter pin bombs are not armed when you take off, and you have to take a cotter pin out of the fuse. It releases a vane that spins around the air once a bomb hits the air, and it releases a detonator so you hit the explosive. And I have the first pin I took out on D-Day mark time, 6:58 a.m. First bomb to leave our plane on D-Day, June 6, 1944. So I did know, otherwise I wouldn't have written it down, I
Yeah.
think.
Do you remember, if anything, what you spent either the night before or?
We didn't have a night before.
I guess that's right. But when you were flying, do you remember what you were talking about with your crew? If there was any ability to talk about anything besides the task at
No,
hand?
we're just doing our actual business. We
Yeah.
check our planes over the channel, make sure they're firing, and on the bomb run, we'd say clear above and clear below, because we'd seen pictures where bombs had dropped on our own planes and knocked their wing off or their tail off. So we were flying that close to each other. We flew an 18-plane group of 6 high, 6 low, and 6 leading. And for fighter protection, we were very close. As close as you are, the better off you were. The Germans were not liable to attack you. A tight formation against a loose formation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had 10 guns aboard, 1050 calibers. And I had 2. The top gunner had 2. The waist gunners each had 1. The ball turret had 2, and tail gunner had 2.
And were you flying with all Americans, or were there other Allied troops?
No, they're all American.
Yeah.
At that day. I mean, I don't know other planes, but we always flew as Americans and never mixed with the RAF or anything like that.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like, either in training or while you were serving, to be Jewish, and how, if at all, that impacted your experience or your understanding of the war?
It didn't impact me whatsoever. I saw no anti-Semitism at all. Our co-pilot was also Jewish. And the only thing different, before the war, I went to the Temple on the High Holidays, maybe 1 or 2 other times, but over in England, we went every Friday night. We had our own services on the base, maybe 15 or 20 of us. I was going to pass up a chance for anything to save me. So that's the only thing different.
Yeah.
And as far as Andy says, I did not know it.
When,
I know my uncle, who graduated, said in 1930 from West Point, affected him all the way through. He was regular Army, and his friends were promoted long before he was for no reason. He was brilliant. He went to MIT also, and eventually he ended up command of the chemical warfare after the war, the general command. But I had no any sentiment with this.
what do you think changed in the period of time, in that 10 or 15 years between?
I think we're just all too many, all mixed up all together. And a lot more Jews were in the Army than there previously. It was nothing that the Jewish people did. I don't know how my uncle got into it, but never asked him. But I said, we weren't a military family. I mean, my great-grandfather fought in the Mexican War in 1846, and my grandfather fought in the Civil War at age 18 in the Texas Brigade. He used to be proud of saying he fought in the Confederate Army, but you can't say that anymore. But he was 18, so everyone's joining up, so I guess he did too. And I had an uncle in World War II, World War I.
Yeah, and were you aware, either before or while you were serving, what was happening to Jews in Europe, and did that have any impact on your desire to serve, or was it unrelated to that? How did that come into play at all?
As I said, I knew I was going to be drafted, so I did what I thought I'd become an officer. But as far as animosity toward Germany, I guess I did. We heard rumors about what was going on, which was the Holocaust. We didn't know for sure, but some of the rabbis were talking about it and telling what was going on. It's, of course, in the 40s, late 40s, so I mean the late 30s and early 40s. So
Yeah.
but it's no, my background is German. My grandfather came from Germany, and my great grandfather did too. So we're all Germans.
And so tell me about the rest of the time in the service after D-Day, what your deployment looked like, and as you approach the end of the war.
Through 35 missions total. I can tell you about two in particular that were interesting. The most interesting of all, on the 21st of June 1944, went into briefing, and there's on the chart, normally you target here, and you go here, and then back to England. Except here we bombed out Ruland, which is right outside of Berlin, and then went into Poltava, Russia, which is now Ukraine. And we landed about 6 o'clock at night. We've been there 11 and a half hours, and we were tended just on the edge of the airfield. And normally in England, our airplanes are scattered all over the field. But in Russia, we landed 48 B-17s, wingtip to wingtip on the fairway. I don't know why. They were space or trying to impress the Russians. But at midnight, there's a flare over the field, and the Germans proceeded to bomb the field for the next hour. And we were in a tent, and I just ran away, and that's all. Found a sled trench with the Russian family and drove in for the hour till the bombing stopped. And came back, and 47 of the 48 B-17s were destroyed. Did you stop that a second?
Sorry?
Can you stop?
Sure. So this was the pin you were talking about.
Yep. Okay, you can start again.
Perfect, it's going.
Okay. Anyway, when I came back to my tent, this piece of shrapnel, German, laying, burned through the top of the tent, laying on the bunk. A little heavy.
Yeah, that is.
So we got stranded in Russia for a week, and we came out through the Air Transport Command sent planes in for us, and first stop was Rostov, which is a Russian air base, and we had fun with them. I had a shooting match with them, and at dinner that night we had a water glass full of vodka. Next morning, water glass full of vodka. We were high before we went to the high. Then went into Tehran. From Tehran, we went into Cairo, and from Cairo to Tripoli to Casablanca, and then back to England. So we're gone 2.5 weeks altogether. So it was unusual. But then we got back after the 4th of July, I guess it was. And we proceeded to do the bombing again. So I bombed Schweinfurt and Regensburg and Merseburg. Our priorities were oil refineries, aircraft plants, ball bearing factories, and railroad yards. The ball bearings, because everything was rolling, needed ball bearings, and of course the railroad yard, they distributed their production away from the city so it wouldn't get bombed. But they need the railroad yards to bring back together to complete them. So those were our 4 priorities. So I bombed Merseburg twice, which was oil refinery, Magdeburg twice, which was oil refinery, Ruland twice, that was outside of Berlin, oil refinery, Regensburg, which was the aircraft plant, and Schweinfurt, which was the ball bearing plant, and Dusseldorf was a aviation factory, and Mainz a couple times went to the railroad yards. And so next, on the 25th mission, we were over Munich, about 27,000 feet. And of course, it's cold of 30, 40 below zero. And about 10 seconds after I released the bombs, a burst of flak burst right on it. Flak is the anti-aircraft 88s they can shoot in groups of 4 and explode at your altitude. They know by radar just where you're going to be in your altitude. And this hit right under us, knocked out 2 engines, and a piece of flak came through the bottom of the plane, and the pilots had an armored seat, maybe a quarter-inch thick, came through there and right through the upper thigh of our co-pilot, made the hole about the size of a baseball, and out the roof. Well, I went up, and for some reason I was a medical officer, but maybe my Boy Scout training came in handy. They gave me a shot of morphine and sprinkled sulfa on the wound, and we were under attack by fighters trying to get back to my guns. But the only thing that saved them, at 40 below zero, the blood froze as it came out. And as we were losing altitude, we couldn't keep up with the rest of the group. That's why the fighters hit us. But the P-51 came and drove them off. We tried to go into Switzerland to get him care, but we couldn't. And it was too high to put a tourniquet on, so the last 3.5 hours I just kept pressure on his wound. And he did survive, though. He was in hospital 4 years and had 22 operations on his leg.
Where did he end up after the war?
He moved to Albuquerque in the real estate business. We used to talk about every 6 months. He was the only one I really kept in touch with. His wife wouldn't let him talk about the war, so he called me. And I don't know if it's funny or sad, but about 30 years after the war, he went in to get a pair of special shoes because of the limp, because of his wound. And the clerk asked, "Why do you need the special shoes?" I said, "Well, I shot while I was flying over Germany." And she said, "What were you doing there?" So, I don't know, that's funny to me, but it's sad also. But that was my 25th mission. And after a 20th mission, they broke up the crew and said the bombardiers and navigators were kept. I guess they had enough other crew members sent home. So the last 7 missions I flew with other crews as replacement. In fact, 27 years ago today was Yom Kippur. And I asked not to fly. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, they came in and said, and told crew, "You're flying." Well, that was me. So I don't know who you're going to complain to when I at 2 in the morning. So I flew on Yom Kippur and just, I guess, prayed a little extra that day for sure. But I finished my 35th mission then on. My 34th was into Berlin, and I thought I'd never come home because that was the most heavily defended city in all of Europe. But normally after I dropped the bombs, the navigator and I get back to back with our flak suits. We had metal flak suits on besides our metal helmets and protect us. But I stayed right in the middle, in the nose, watched the bombs go all the way down. Figured I wasn't coming back. And I finished my 35th mission the 9th of October 1944. I saw the letter from I wrote home. I said, "Maybe tonight I'll get a good night's sleep. I won't be shot at tomorrow." So I was afraid to come home because they're retraining us for B-29 flights for Japan. I've been shot at enough, so there was an opening for Group Awards Officer, which I took. So the next 6 months I stayed in England till March of 45 when I did come home. And when the war ended in Europe, with middle of Texas, and bombed their instructor school, and we had no celebration. The war is still going on there. But on VJ Day, I was in Big Spring, Texas, teaching French cadets how to bomb. And that night, everybody got drunk, the whole town, everybody on the base. I mean, one guy had a bottle of scotch, another bourbon, another rye, where they could drink of everything. The whole town, the whole base got drunk. Well, we survived. That was a good reason to get drunk.
Yeah, were there any moments during your deployment or after where you remember being, I mean, it sounds like a few, that stand out as being particularly alarming or scary, or things that have stayed with you?
Well, of course, Munich was the worst. And the other bad mission was in Nuremberg. We had 2 engines shot out. And that was the 10th of September. And Patton was on the move after St. Lo. You can go back a little bit. On the 25th of July, we bombed St. Lo. After 6 weeks, our troops were still only 20 miles inland. They're stuck in the hedgerows of France, and so the whole Air Force bombed right in front of our troops. And we dropped 100-pound bombs, and I understand because Pat didn't want 500-pound bomb craters for his tanks to go over. But anyway, we disrupted the Germans' communication, their morale. Hour after hour, planes going over. So that was the 25th of May, and Paris was liberated a month later. But this was the 10th of September, and about 100 miles west of the Rhine, we had 2 engines shot out by flak. And our orders were we could not drop west of the Rhine because we didn't know where the troops were. So I had to fly in on 2 engines for 100 miles and dropped our bombs on the east side of the Rhine. Around, came back. That's the only thing I ever told my kids during the war. Is told them this red brick building dropped the bombs on was a bakery, and now they're making pretzels. That was my whole war story for the kids. So that's another one that stood out. Besides the Berlin, which every time you went out, you're just worried.
Yeah, and so you talked about VJ Day a little bit. Did you think, I know you tried to get out of, we're hoping that you wouldn't have to fly more missions, having been shot at enough, but did you think there was a chance you were going to end up flying over Japan?
No, but after came back home, I said I went to instructor school and was in Big Spring, so no, I don't think there was a chance it was going to be 29. When I was in England, when I finished, definitely there was a chance. If I'd come home in October of 44, I'm sure I would have been assigned to B-29.
And how much longer did you serve after VJ Day until your enlistment was on?
The war's over September 2nd. I sent home on the 12th of September to Jefferson Barracks, and officially that was activated on the October 20th, 1945. I was in there 3 years, 3 months, and 14 days.
But who's counting?
Yeah.
You mentioned before we started the interview that you really didn't talk about it, and you mentioned it just now, that you didn't really talk about it for a couple of decades after the war, and curious why that is and why that changed.
Well, for me, they asked me to. I never talked about it. No one asked me. But in fact, I went on the honor flight in September of 2011, and my guardian was T. Bauer, who was head of the historical site out at Smartfield in St. Charles. So I gave him most of my stuff. And but back to your question again, I forgot.
Question was why didn't you talk about it for so long, and why did you start talking about it?
I went back to work. I wasn't going back to rice sticks because at 50 cents an hour clerk, I wasn't interested. But the Chamber of Commerce had a test for returning veterans, which I took, and I had a job offer from Roosevelt Paper Company for $35 a week, which wasn't bad, I guess. But I saw the sales manager on Washington Avenue. He said, "Ralph, come and talk to me." So I did, and he offered me a job of $175 a month and a car as a salesman. So I took it. And I traveled for the next 48 years as a salesman. Got 2 years of rice sticks, and when my father manufactured junior dresses for 2 years. And when they liquidated in 1950, I went to independent rep. It was one company, 25 years selling children's clothes. And when they got out of business, then I had others. So I did travel for 40 years selling children's clothes in big little stores in Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas. But there's no reason. I had all my friends are in the Army, the Navy, Marines. We never talked about it. Poker, whatever it is. One of my best friends was bombardier in Italy. We never talked about it. I don't know why.
Do you think there are people who had a hard time emotionally coming back, that people struggled that way?
Maybe only one that I know of. That was my friend, the bombardier. And he had problems, I think, over in Italy. And he didn't finish his missions for some reason. So I didn't ask him.
Yeah. Do you think you changed because of your service, or maybe how do you think you changed because of your service?
I really don't. Of course, other people would know. As far as I'm concerned, I came back and I got a job within a month or so, whatever it was, and just went about my business. So, and the rest of us the same way. A lot of them are in their family business, whatever it is, and we just went about it. So I didn't join the American Legion or anything, because I was traveling all the time. So maybe if I'd been there, there'd been more talk. I don't know.
Yeah.
But among ourselves, we didn't talk about it.
And then I guess my last question is there anything, anything I haven't asked you, or anything you wish people would ask you that you don't get asked about this?
Well, you just can't understand what you're going through. That's all. I mean, you're up there getting shot at, and you're bombardier. You're right in the nose, and there's that black cloud of flak you're going to fly right into, and nothing you do. It's more than scary. But you do it. It was your job. I don't know how we do it. Looking back now, I don't know how we did it. I mean, taking off and you know you're going to get killed. But at that time, I was 22 and had no big plans for the future. I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I was going to be a teacher. I was going to be a doctor. I wasn't going to be any of that. So I had no. My only big plans after the war was to buy a car. And so if you got killed, so what?
Yeah, but go ahead.
That's easy to say, but that's your attitude. At least mine. I'm sure all of us are. Only one of our crew members was married. Our gunners were 19 for the most part. Navigator was 25. Our co-pilot was only 20. The pilot was 22. So, how old are you?
31.
So, not that far away. But can you imagine a 22-year-old pilot and a 20-year-old co-pilot? That's what all these planes were.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to fathom, as you said, being 19 or 20 or 21 or 22, expecting to die, or at least there's a good chance of it.
There were, unfortunately, 400,000 that did. I mean, for the guys in the first wave going into Omaha Beach, the other beaches weren't as bad from what I understand, but they did it.
Yeah. Well, and it's, as we said before the interview, there's just fewer World War II veterans around every day to talk about this stuff and talk about how the world has changed since.
When I talked, people come up, their grandfather, their cousin, their uncle were in the service doing something. They don't have any idea what they did. They didn't talk about it. Nobody did, or very, very few. Why? I don't know. It just came back and went about our business. I guess it's amazing, but that's what we did. When the Vietnam people came back, was in a story, they were frowned upon or spit upon, maybe even. But he only came back individually, so maybe more than the 15,000 came back on the Queen Mary one time, and it may have been read of something that went back and went about my business.
Anything else?
I'll show you a few things if you want.
Sure, but now I'll stop the recording, but appreciate you taking the time.